Here you are on a Zoom to talk about writing with us, to listen about writing. And my name's Blake Kimsey. You've probably got an email from me with a Zoom link. I'm the executive director of writingworkshops.com. And I have known Maya Bethany for over 3 years now and gotten to witness parts of her writing journey. And it's a real thrill tonight for us at writingworkshops.com to get to host this discussion, Writing Through Trauma and the Return Trip. And we've got a great panel assembled for you tonight. We're going to have lots of opportunities for Q&A and all the rest, but I just wanted to say welcome. Thank you for allowing us to be part of your week. And I'm going to hand it over now to Brian, and he's going to get us started. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Blake, and thanks to Writing Workshops for hosting us this evening. It's sure a pleasure, and very grateful for all of our panelists who are going to be on and everybody that's joining us. And we've got a great evening planned for you all. So just as a little housekeeping reminder, if you would please turn your camera on. It's great to see those smiling faces. But then if you would go ahead and turn your mics off. And as we go through this, type your information or your questions, I should say, in the chat throughout. And if we say something you have a question about, go ahead and put it in the chat, and that'll just help us to remember it. And then we will try to answer those as we get close to the end. So to kick us off, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to kick it off. And I'm Brian Brandt, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. I am the founder and president of Core Insights, which is a training and development company. And I am the co-author of a couple of books. But for tonight, I'm just thrilled to be your moderator. So Tina Beier, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. As you said, I am Tina, and I am the COO of Rising Action. So I'm on this panel because my small press is the publisher of Maya's book. I've worked in publishing my entire career, starting as an editor at a legal reference firm and moving into project coordination after that. I was there for about 10 years, and then I also achieved a certificate in publishing and a grad certificate in creative writing. So I started Rising Action in 2020 with my colleague, Alex Brown. We're still going. So at the moment, I'm also the main line editor of the company as well. So I have two main jobs, and I did the line edit on Maya's book. So I'm deeply immersed in her story, and I'm so excited to be here to kind of kick off her publishing launch. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tina. Brenda McBride, tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, friends. My name is Brenda McBride. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been in the field of clinical social work for over 25 years. And a lot of my expertise and specialized training is in trauma. So I facilitate 2 trauma support groups every week, and I have for going on about close to 7 years. And Maya is actually, one of the reasons one of those support groups is possible. So she has a nonprofit foundation, the 1 in 3 Foundation, and we provide counseling and trauma support services for low-income folks, and we really try to have a nice, diverse population. So I'm just here to be your mental health support and to cheer on my good friend.
All right. Thank you, Brenda. And Maya Golden. Tell us more, Maya.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion. I am Maya Golden. I am the author of The Return Trip, a memoir, and I really wanted to have the opportunity not only to share a little bit about the book, but writing about complex PTSD in particular, revisiting trauma, particularly childhood trauma. My career background is that of a journalist. I have worked in both print and broadcast, but publishing is an entirely different beast. And so I learned quite a bit along this journey, thanks to Tina, and I had the support of great people like Brenda and Brian. But tonight, the goal of this panel discussion is to help you along your publishing journey. And it was through writing workshops that I was able to get started. So I'm very grateful to them as well. Brian?
All right. So before we jump in too far, I do want to note that the return trip includes content warnings of sexual abuse, trauma, sex addiction, alcoholism, suicidal ideation, and an emotional affair. Conversations and discussions around these topics may be triggering, and if you need to step away from the panel discussion at times, please feel free to take care of your needs for yourself. So just want to make sure everybody is fully aware of that. So as we were planning this, Maya and I really thought that a good way to start would be to have Maya read an excerpt from the book. So Maya, if you would, please.
This is from chapter 5 of the return trip, called The Angels in Heaven Done Sign My Name, and it's set in 1991. It was hot in the church, and I was restless. An 11-year-old crammed on a pew with at least a dozen other people, most of them bathed in too much perfume that itched my nose and made it hard to breathe. The remnants of the stained burgundy crushed velvet cushion under my backside had lost any plushness years ago, and the hard wooden back of the pew wasn't adding to my comfort. Yet another Sunday afternoon, 2 hours into a far too long sermon. Like most Black girls in Texas my age, I obediently sat through the grueling marathon at our Baptist church. Even if the air conditioner had been on, it would have been sweltering because of all the bodies tightly packed into pews. There wasn't a single clock in the sanctuary, and I wondered if this was on purpose, so the congregation's only squirming would be from the sting of the pastor's words to us sinners and not from restlessness. The only time we could count on the benediction, the dismissal from church, taking place as close to 1 o'clock for the 11 a.m. service, was when the Dallas Cowboys had a noon kickoff. No preacher in the area wanted to risk holding everyone hostage through the start of the second half of the game. I neither loved going to church nor did I hate it. It was simply a part of life that was expected and accepted as a Black child. Then I heard it. Our pastor's booming voice read Matthew 18:10 with conviction. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones. For I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. My head shot up. My pastor looked out into the crowd of attentive faces and said, every child is protected by an angel. My shoulders hunched towards my ears and I felt my body grow hot. It was not the type of warmth you feel with a fever. It was a burning from my core that rose like lava to the crown of my head. Rage. Where in the hell was my angel?
Thank you, Maya. Does make me ready to read the rest of the book, but so that excerpt is set in 1991. And so Maya, if you would share with us a little bit about your creative process in setting the scene and especially related to the time period.
Well, it was through a workshop, actually. It was through writing workshops that one of the key pieces of information that I took away was really to go back and write down as much as you could about yourself during a specific time period, to detail, this was 1991 for me. I was 11. So at 11 years old on a Sunday, what would I have been wearing? What were the sights? What were the smells? What were the activities? So I put as much down as I could on paper in research, even things that didn't make it into the excerpt or the book itself. What type of music did I listen to? What type of movies and TV shows were popular that I watched? That helped me to immerse myself in that time period. So when I wrote it, whether those things made it into the page or not, then it was basically able to time travel through writing, because I could very much feel, hear, see all of those things so vividly as an 11-year-old. So I would encourage anyone writing specific time periods to do the same. Whether you put that much detailed information into it or not, still think about what you were doing in that year or that time, the clothes you wore, the music that you listened to, where did you live? What did your house look like? So that helps to really set the scene for you as the writer. And then that carries over into the world building that even in memoir, there's still a need for world building and scene setting, because You know where you grew up, you know your experiences, we don't. So as vividly as you can do that, that's very important.
Yeah, so it sounds like all of that kind of helped you to get embedded and really in that mentality of the era. And yeah, I think I'd like to hear more about what music you were listening to and what your groovy bell bottoms were, but that'll be another time. So, Maya, what led you to write The Return Trip?
That's a really great question. Part of it was when I began my healing and recovery journey. I am a recovering addict. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and sexual assault. I was looking for a book that was a very honest, vulnerable depiction of the repercussions of enduring years long abuse, years long trauma as a child. And this story in particular is really the story of what happens to a girl, a child, when she develops the core belief at a very early age that she exists for the pleasure and gratification of other people. And I was looking for that story, and there were a lot of self help books. There were a lot of books geared towards addiction recovery, but nothing that I found that spoke to me. So I really felt that I wanted to write the book that I was looking for. And through my work, Brenda mentioned the 1 in 3 Foundation and our work in East Texas with survivors. I've been able to share my story. And those were the baby steps to being able to put my story and my experiences out into the world for the sake of helping other survivors, but also the sake of helping loved ones and care providers as well, those who work with survivors and those who are in their proximity, professional or personally, to understand why their behaviors are the way that they are sometimes.
All right. So certainly everybody's experience would be a little bit different or maybe very drastically different. When did you feel ready to begin writing this memoir, and how did you begin?
It's very funny that you asked that, because the start of this book, when I first sat down to write it, it was a fictional story. I created a character who was based off of me. This was her story. This wasn't Maya's story. This was a character by the name of Stacy, and this was all that she went through. She was a journalist. She had a prominent TV award-winning career and a husband and a child, and she was battling this secret sex addiction and perfectionism and all these coping mechanisms. It was me, but I made it a fictional adaptation. And so when I first started querying, I sent it out, and rightfully so, it got rejected. And I believe the reason that it got rejected was it wasn't authentic. It was me using a character as a shield. And I finally had the courage to say, I'm already speaking about this. I'm already sharing about this. I've heard the need from it from other survivors. Let's take the veil away and be authentic and be vulnerable, which is extremely hard and difficult. And we're going to be talking about that. And so that's when I made the decision to move from the fictional adaptation to a memoir, and to be able to share my story and give voice to some things that I had not even spoken about to family members. And it was extremely difficult, but I'm very proud that I did do that.
Maya, whether it was fictional or a memoir, obviously it was a big challenge and very traumatic. How did you care for yourself while revisiting these traumatic events?
I'd have to say one of the biggest things that I learned is to give yourself grace when you're writing a memoir. There are a lot of writing pieces of advice that are out there, or writing activities. You know, we're in the month of November right now, so NaNoWriMo is going, and everybody's writing so many words a day and trying to get down 50,000 words by the end of the month. I think that to do that when you're writing a memoir, especially one dealing with trauma, to put yourself in that position day after day is such a physical task, but also emotionally and mentally draining, because you are revisiting that trauma and your body does not know. I read that excerpt from 1991. I can say right now, you're safe, you're okay. This is November 2023. But in writing it, when I talked about setting that scene, going back to those sights and sounds and smells, my body doesn't know that it's not 1991, because that trauma is unlocked. And so I would say just give yourself grace. That's what I had to do. Some days I could write extremely difficult passages and then not touch it for a week, and I was okay with that. I was also blessed to have a publisher that was okay with that and gave me a time frame that allowed that to happen. But knowing when to let your foot off the gas, I think is probably the biggest thing, because some of those triggers may begin to show up once you open that door to that traumatic history.
So I hear you saying grace and pace, and that's both for yourself, but also from the publisher. Can you share, just you hit upon NaNoWriMo. Can you just share a little bit about that, Maya, just in case people aren't aware?
It's basically when you set out to try to write 50,000 words or at least for a novel in a month. So during the month of November, people try to write at least the first draft of a manuscript. And that might work very well, I think, in fiction writing or genres that aren't as personal as memoir, but 50,000 words in 30 days is extremely taxing for any writer, but especially if you're unlocking the past in such a descriptive way.
So how difficult was your writing experience with the return trip?
You know, I can say it's the hardest thing I've ever done. I can truly say that. I say that as uh, an autism mom. I say that as a survivor. I say that as someone who has gone to treatment for addiction recovery, which is part of the book. But writing it was by far the most difficult thing, because I was putting down on paper some things that I had not even discussed, and doing so in a manner that is very cinematic, even though it's literary. You're trying to set the scene. You're trying to paint the picture for your readers. And so in doing so, it paints the picture for yourself. And that door opens. And so I had nightmares. Um, I had panic attacks. I had to see a cardiologist just to make sure that those panic attacks were not any other underlying issues. They put me on propranolol, which is a medication that's a beta blocker, but they actually also give it to survivors of sexual assault in the aftermath so that it lessens the physical response. And I do this work consistently. I talk to survivors consistently. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I want to stress is make sure you have the mindset in place to not go into it and think, well, I'm past this, or I've addressed this in therapy. You may very well have, but when you're doing it so descriptively, it can still open some doors that you don't expect it to do.
All right. Thank you, Maya. So you've really established just the challenge and the trauma and the stress and all of that. So want to hear from a mental health professional. So Brenda, when revisiting trauma in writing, what are some things writers can do to practice self-care?
Okay, well, self-care only works if we do it. And sometimes, particularly with complex post-traumatic stress, part of our identity, our belief system is that we're unworthy of care, and self-neglect is our familiar. So number one is it's giving yourself permission to do it. And I think it's important too, especially when we talk about, there's all different types of folks that are surviving in different parts of their journey. Sustainable self-care only works in a paradigm, in an environment in which the people around me care about my physical health and my mental health and don't benefit from me being silent or secret or voiceless. So when I've talked to 5 people today that are in an environment, all survivors of childhood sexual abuse and trauma, who are in an environment with people who don't support their wellness. So it's really hard to take care of yourself when your environment says, yeah, but what are you doing for me? All right. And self-care is not just what we do, it can also be what we don't do. So self-care, some of the things that I would invite people to do. And notice the word invitation. Okay. I invite you. It means I have a choice. It doesn't mean should, which can induce shame. An invitation. You might give yourself permission. She said grace. I literally write myself a permission slip. You know, I give myself permission to change course. I give myself permission to reach out, to be kind to myself, for it to be imperfect, to walk away, to notice my body. I might give myself permission to be flexible, right? Self-care might look like setting boundaries. It might look like laughing, crying, going outside. She's talking about a lot of physical symptoms that come up. Trauma is stored in the body and in feelings and not in words, ironically. Okay. So movement, exercise, breath work, stretching, those were things that I would say do for self-care. Some of the don'ts, I'd say getting stuck in logic. Like this happened 25 years ago. What's my problem? Right? Getting stuck in a logical brain. I have a master's degree. What's my problem? Judgment, comparing yourself to other people, being rigid. Don't answer every call or notification that you get. Don't should on yourself. Don't judge yourself, right? Those are the things that can elicit shame. And in the process, if somebody has a history of trauma, that will actually trigger body responses to what she was talking about.
Okay. So lots of good things for us to think about is in relation to self-care. And some of those I think we would think about, and some of those I think we wouldn't naturally. So thank you, Brenda. So Brenda, how can you prepare to revisit trauma in writing? What can we do in advance?
Okay, so I think revisit is a word that I'm really liking right now. Revisit is so important because, you know, again, if I'm visiting, then I can come, but then I can leave. Okay, revisiting. So writing that permission slip, I'm gonna be flexible and revisit this, not necessarily relive everything. So if you haven't done extensive, you know, trauma work, therapy work, it can actually, you know, dysregulate, you know, or be not good for your nervous system in terms of your heart health, in terms of your mental health, if you take too deep dive in. All right. So one of the things that you can do to prepare is, you know, have a mental health professional online, a friend online, you know, some support. I think some basic psychoeducation about what trauma is and what trauma isn't is important. So that's one thing that I can do to prepare is learn about it. Like I can know this might show up in my body and trauma isn't stored in words. So it might be hard for me to find words because I'm literally writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that part of our brain, when we go through a traumatic event, the part of our brain that has our words and has a timekeeper, that part of our brain goes offline. In fact, if I want to trigger somebody as a trauma therapist, and sometimes therapists do this erroneously, is they'll say, well, what happened to you when you were 8? I don't know, because I only develop long-term memory when I feel safe. And that's neurobiology of trauma. Okay, so it helps me to have compassion for myself when I can say, oh, this is just how the brain works. This stuff might come up in my body. So knowing in advance, you know, that's going to be important. I think also too, part of what our brain does and our body does is to protect us is sometimes my brain is not all the way there. I experience something in my body and part of my brain says, this is too hard. I have to help you. So I'm not going to remember this part right now. All right. And so we disassociate. All right. That's kind of like being in your body and not being in your body. And that helps you to survive really hard things. But when you're trying to literally wrap words and integrate words, and that part of your brain wasn't online when you had the trauma, and to help you to survive, you push it away, then integrating is really challenging. Right? So that's really challenging. So that can bring on a response too. I think a little bit of distance, it's so interesting. I didn't know that fact that initially you had this character, Stacy. So I actually think that helped you to be able to go in, because when we can have a little bit of distance, right? You revisiting was being Stacy first, right? because there was a little bit of distance between being, all the way in first. So I think that was great. So, but that's what I would advise people. I would let them know, learn a little bit about it, what it is and what it isn't, and, educate yourself on that, and then just really give yourself permission. This might look different.
All right. So permission and be a visitor. Don't be a dweller. Okay. So Brenda, the return trip addresses complex PTSD. What is complex PTSD and how does it differ from PTSD?
Okay. The main difference between, post-traumatic stress that, people typically think of, like from a car wreck or maybe a natural disaster, versus complex PTSD, it's going to be really the length of the trauma and the duration from this exposure to prolonged and repetitive events. And escape, is dangerous. So they're going to have long-term trauma. When you go through a traumatic event, essentially what your brain does and what your body does is it responds like a tiger's chasing you. All right. It responds. Yeah. So if a tiger's chasing me, I get chemicals that tell me run, fight, fight the threat. But what happens? Right. The tiger goes away if you're in a hurricane. The tiger goes away if you're in a car wreck when the disaster's over. But what happens when the tiger sneaks into my room every single night? Or when I don't know when the tiger's going to come? What happens is your body pumps out stress chemicals constantly, and nothing is safe. Every minute of every day, it's scanning for safety. Am I safe in this moment? Am I safe in this moment? Am I safe to feel? So that's common. Also, folks that, struggle with complex PTSD, they're going to have more issues with identity, sense of self, more relationship struggles. So we're still going to have things like avoidance and hypervigilance, intrusive memories, nightmares. We're still going to have that, memory problems, but there's going to be much more difficulty with relationships. And when you think about it, I mean, if I'm abused by a caregiver, right, as a child, the very people who I'm biologically designed to go to for nurture and safety are the source of my terror and my shame. Biologically, I'm taught to go to them, but it hurts. Then you can see why it would create a push-pull dynamic, tumultuous, pattern of difficulty in relationships.
Certainly. So you mentioned several things that would be triggering. And so Maya, I want to come back to you. And I do want to note before I ask Maya this question that Maya has done extensive trauma work and also works with survivors, and this was still extremely difficult for her. But Maya, what were some of the triggers that you experienced in that writing process?
I think there were instances where it wasn't just the mentions of the traumatic event. So the way that the return trip is structured is, at least in part one, there's a traumatic childhood event, and then it shows its manifestation in myself as an adult. So it's a back and forth between the child and then the adult that I became. The triggers that I experienced, or when I noted that I would have a nightmare, or I noted that my mood would swing significantly, was after writing several of those either childhood passages that address a traumatic event or the abuse, or even for the adult sections, parts that were about shame, parts that brought up feelings of, wow, I did this. So this is not just a matter of writing a book about the worst things that have happened and how I overcame them. It's also a matter of, these are some of the worst things that I did and I'm owning them. And it's a very difficult thing to put voice to that sometimes. And you feel a lot of shame and guilt again. It's almost secondary, even when you've done the work to move past it, to say, wow, I really don't like how I treated my husband at this point, or I feel a lot of guilt for having engaged in this behavior that was promiscuous. And so that was I would notice again that I would have mood swings, or my appetite would plunge. Some days it would be difficult to get out of bed, or a total lack of motivation, which I'm a very perfectionism is a prevalent theme in this book as well. And I'm a very high achieving person. So that created in itself sort of a whiplash effect, because I'm high achieving, but then I was feeling depression and feeling like I should, as Brenda was saying, I was shooting all over myself, should have been doing more. I should have been writing more. I should have been doing all of these different things. So that just kept this cycle of shame and guilt going. And having a therapist to talk to about that, and a counselor and a support system of friends was crucial through getting through that process.
Thank you. And so I want to turn and ask Tina some questions. And Tina Beier. So Tina, what aspects are you as a publisher looking for in memoir?
Okay, so our CEO, Alex, handles most of our acquisitions, and she's actually doing her PhD on trauma in literature. So she tends to gravitate towards memoirs about people overcoming or learning to live with trauma, or stories of how trauma led people to positive outcomes eventually. So kind of like stories of hope. For me, I lean towards memoirs of people who aren't afraid to tell a story that society often doesn't want to talk about, such as, in this case, like women's sex addiction. I kind of go for stories that are stigmatized because I want people to be able to tell those stories. So I guess I'm just all about stories where people can tell their truth. And I'm also looking for great writing, and that's exactly what the return trip has. It has all three of these things. So I think that's why we were so excited when we got this query.
Yeah, so what about Maya's query stood out to you?
So all of these things that I mentioned, but plus like her honesty and also her background in reporting, we thought that aspect of her journey was interesting and important because she brought kind of her whole personality, her whole person into the book. It's not just this one thing. It's like how this impacted her whole life. Because her life, like pretty much everyone's life, but I would say Maya's is probably one of the more complex lives that I've ever heard and met as a person. You know, she's got her trauma, her work, her marriage, and the racism and sexism she's encountered in her life. So we thought, wow, what a brave woman, and her story deserves to be shared. We also thought that her accounting of her time at the Shades of Hope Center was really important because, you know, if you haven't experienced counseling or gone to that kind of a situation before, there's not a lot of realistic depictions of it in media, like in books and TV. So we thought that this would be great because it's not a sensationalized version of what therapy should and could be. So we just thought it would be it's a very honest query and a very honest book.
All right. So what do stories that address mental health, such as complex PTSD, need to offer structurally?
I think that we need to assume that the readers are not experts on the topic. So as such, the story needs to have a narrative structure in a sense that shows how trauma not only begins, like why this journey happened, but how that develops or shifts, often presenting itself in different and unexpected forms. The book almost needs to walk readers through the writer's journey so they're able to empathize and understand the nuances of the writer's mental health. This is not a very easy thing to do, but Maya pulls it off exceptionally. I understood kind of what happened to her and why she had these mental health problems and PTSD, why this all happened and what she did about it and how she went about it. It's sometimes hard to read because you're like, oh, you know, you'd said that really mean thing like to your husband, but then it's like, I understand why that would have happened and how you worked through that. And it was very emotional. And I will admit I cried like 3 times reading the memoir. And our copy editor, she's like, I cried the whole time. I couldn't stop. So yeah, it's very hard hitting.
Yeah. So what is the importance of publishing stories relevant to survivors of trauma and marginalized communities, Tina?
So this is kind of a 2-part question. So I'm going to answer it kind of 2 separate ways. So when it comes to trauma, I think this is just my perspective, but I think it used to be that we didn't. Oh, I got muted. Now I'm unmuted. Okay. So I think it used to be that we didn't want to hear about trauma. I know when I grew up in the 90s, I'll admit it, I'm almost 40. uh, going to therapy was seen as kind of like weird. And I distinctly recall my parents saying things like, you keep that to yourself. Don't tell people about your problems. I think people felt like they weren't able to discuss trauma and coping and healing for fear of being looked down on or seen as like broken. The more people talk about trauma, though, the more we as a society can help those who've experienced it. Talking about going to therapy or having struggles, helps us be open with one another and more accepting. Like, for example, sorry, TMI here, I had a late miscarriage once, and I always talk about it openly, though, because I want other women and pregnant people to know that it's normal and they shouldn't feel ashamed of it, that it happened to them, or if it does happen to them. So I think the more that we publish stories about deep trauma and counseling and mental health, the more the stigma will drop and the more people will go and actually get help. And then for the second part about marginalized communities, so historically, people of marginalized groups haven't been allowed the space to tell their stories. As you might know, the publishing industry is still very skewed towards white stories. So at Rising Action, we're striving to break away from that trend. Everyone deserves to be represented and heard, and these stories can also be financially successful. A lot of hesitation towards publishing diverse content is that it won't make money, but we at Rising Action believe that that's kind of an excuse. Alex and I are not people of color, but we're trying our best to help diversify the industry and let previously ignored stories and people be heard, because we think those stories are really important and bring new perspectives and different perspectives to everybody. So sorry, that was long.
No, but
Clearly I'm passionate about this stuff.
Well, I share that, and I certainly appreciate that. So what was something Maya did well in immersing the reader in different time periods?
So she's very good at descriptions and explaining how old she was using kind of context, and she'll describe what she was wearing or something that she had, like a toy or an object or something that was going on. For example, NSYNC, we know when they came out, and and so I won't get into that part. But I was like, oh, I know how old I was when that happened. So, it's kind of a great way to kind of bring people in, kind of like forcing them to have their own memories of that event. I also think the nonlinear approach to the memoir is one of its best strengths, because rather than this caused that kind of approach, she shows that experiences of abuse compound and are interwoven into all aspects of her life, kind of like what Brenda was saying. It manifested from childhood to adulthood in different ways, and it helps shows readers, I almost said writers, almost shows readers that the abuse isn't just like the incident, but how it can change or form all aspects of yourself. The return trip is a very immersive experience, and I just think, the way that it's structured is why that happens. You're kind of forced to put yourself in Maya's perspective at different times in her life, and it's so well done.
Yeah. Thank you, Tina. And so before I ask Maya to sing her favorite NSYNC song, no, I'm not going to do that. But I did want to remind our audience that we're going to be taking questions from the audience here very soon. And so if you have any, please type those into chat and we will see if we can't answer as many of those as possible. But so we were talking about, kind of the different time periods, and as well as many other things that you had to research in order to write such a great book, Maya. So how did you approach research for this book?
There were a few different things. One, I went straight to the source on a couple. I did have conversations with my mom and my dad early on about things that I wouldn't have remembered from, being 2 years old or 3 years old. And when they were kind of inquiring early on, well, why are you asking about this? And it was, oh, you'll find out. And that was really, I didn't necessarily tell them at the beginning that I was writing the book. And then eventually I did have to have that conversation with them. And they were very forthcoming about it. I learned things that I didn't remember. My dad worked for, at the time, a technology company that was in Dallas by the name of Apple. A lot of people might not even remember that happened back in that time period. I talked to family. I talked to some friends for the chapters that are in middle school and high school, just to clarify. But I also use things like Google Scholar. As Tina mentioned, and as Brenda mentioned, one thing that you have to do is understand the trauma itself, but also you have to educate the reader. And so I did some research on topics such as sex addiction. I did some research on the American healthcare system and how it funds or does not fund mental health, which is a whole thing that I could rage about right now. I also used some studies so that I was able to use some concrete numbers of percentages of, if people have experienced this trauma, then how many are showing these addictive behaviors. And I used a resource called Taylor and Francis Online. I think I paid $40 for a subscription to that and had access to as many of their studies that I could. And so it was a small investment to be able to put those, and they're footnotes in the book. There are a section that does address that specifically. So, and then also resources from my counselor, and then other mental health care professionals that I just reached out to who were experts on the topic. So they were very helpful, and very willing to help me in the writing process.
So clearly you dug deep. So delving deep into the research and into your own trauma history, did it have an impact on not just your mental health, but physiological impact?
It did. I mentioned the panic attacks. I mentioned having to go to a cardiologist. I had what we thought was chronic, a respiratory issue, and it's Brenda can attest to this, that survivors of complex PTSD often have chronic respiratory issues. And so I had bronchitis for something like 8 months, and went through a number of different treatments for it. And so it was very interesting to see how that manifested through the writing process. So just be prepared. It's not just the mental aspect of it, but your body, as we say, and there's that book, The Body Keeps Score. And it will manifest. And that's not to discourage anyone. Please don't feel like this is a horror story about writing a memoir, and please don't feel like the book is entirely a sad story. There is very much levity mixed into it, but just be prepared. I do see, I'm going to clarify, someone said Taylor and who when I mentioned the resources. It was Taylor and Francis Online, which is a company that has a lot of the research studies. I'll type that in the chat.
So Brenda, if you would jump back in. And so Brenda, how do you know if you're ready to write and revisit your trauma?
Oh gosh. I think that the first thing is recognize that, everybody's experience is different. And so know yourself.
Okay.
Know yourself. And that can be a scary process, right? Because the self gets fragmented. So if that takes, therapy, then get a therapist. If that takes, doing some body work, do some body work. I think focusing on what's your why is important.
Right.
So the how of how it's going to get there, I think, especially when, we're addressing issues of perfectionism and shame, which are correlated together, right? So I think addressing, like, what's my why? How am I going to feel when it's done? Right? How am I going to feel when it helps the people that I know it's going to help? Then you can get a different feeling in your body. That's not like, how's this going to get done? I can't remember this day. I should have had this done. So I think how you're ready to write it is, again, I'm going to revisit it, and it might look a whole lot different than how I think it's going to look. And that's okay. It's going to reach who it needs to reach and help who it needs to help.
That's good. Thank you. So it's worth mentioning that in the book, it's really designed with some book club, some mental health care provider, and some student questions that are in the book. So as you all receive the book, as you purchase the book and you receive it, please make sure you really look for those opportunities, because those are super helpful and healthy, I would say, and probably makes the reading experience even more enjoyable. So Maya, I'm seeing there's some questions here. And so let's see what we've got here. So got one. 3 years into working on my memoir, wondering at what point pace becomes unhealthy. And then they kind of explains, I can't work on this forever. Curious about how you both pushed and gave yourself some grace.
Well, that is a very good question. I did, in fact, have a deadline. So after I signed my book deal, that deadline was there. So it was, my process was a little somewhat abnormal. I will say I wrote a nonfiction book proposal, even if it as memoir, which is creative nonfiction. But I wrote the first 7 chapters of the book, and then I queried it more as nonfiction. And so Rising Action picked the book up and then gave me basically a year and a half to finish the rest of the book. And so once we set that timeline, it was an accountability for me. And that's what I would say is probably the thing that might help you over that hurdle, is having an accountability partner, whether you've got a publishing deal or not. Having a writing group that you're a member of, having another writer that you are friends with, even someone that you just is a trusted friend to say, hey, I've made more progress, or I wrote, 1,000 words today, or I've written another chapter. That can help you when you feel like you've put it down and let it sit for too long, to get you over that hurdle. So that was definitely something that worked for me. I did have a deadline again, but at the same time, I was still able to say, you know what, I can write this day and then take tomorrow off because of that process. So I hope that answers that question.
So one thing that kind of stood out to me as you said that is, kind of don't go at this alone, figure out what level of community you need, and lean on them and engage them. So another question here from the audience: how do I not feel like I'm complaining or listing off the things that have happened to me?
One thing that you really need to focus on when writing a memoir is, what is the through line of the book? What is the focus of this particular story? Because it can very easily become that I've experienced several other traumatic events in my life that did not make the pages of this book, or witnessed things in my family that can be deemed traumatic that are not in this book. This is a book about sexual abuse and the recovery from it and sexual addiction. So I had to come back to, what are those key points, and how do I tell this story and make sure that I stay on task with this story? Um, Having also people that give you feedback is great. Once you get to that point in the process, beta readers. So it can say, if it feels like you've gone a little bit off task here, and you are talking about something that's not related to the main plot, they can help you bring it back to the main focal point. But I think that's the biggest thing, is finding what the through line is, and then making sure that in every chapter you're still hitting that. Even if you've got other things that have gone on in your life, a memoir is still a very focused story. And I don't want to put Tina on the spot, but Tina, can you attest a little bit to that, or have any comment on that?
I'm trying to think of where to start here. Can you ask me again? I was trying to think of it all in my head, and then I confused myself.
Just
So-
the question from the audience was, how do
Yeah.
you write it without it seeming like you're just listing complaints?
Oh,
or
okay. Sorry, you had a long answer there, and also it's late for me here. I guess it's to intersperse it with moments of levity, if you can find some, like moments that are not like heartwarming, but kind of take a step back from, I guess, the trauma, and try to show how you can have moments of positive and love and happiness in your life, while having these things in the back of your mind. So I think it's kind of that, like showing that someone who has PTSD isn't always just sitting sad, like it comes at you at times that you don't expect. So maybe it's hard, because it depends on the story too, right? Like everyone's story is different. So some memoirs might benefit from being very heavy, where others might benefit from having, like your part I mentioned in sync again, like having that kind of almost funny moment kind of here and there. It really does depend on the story that you're wanting to tell, and the tone that you want to convey. I think a lot of people get confused about memoir thinking that it's just you telling your story, but you're also telling a story. Like you have to pull out the same narrative techniques and same narrative craft that a fiction writer is using. It's just you're using your own story to tell it. So it really does, it really is subjective, I think, to the story that you're trying to tell. Thanks.
I am noting that every time NSYNC is brought up, Maya grins. So
It's an inside joke.
That's a
You have to read the
glimmer.
book to know.
The glimmers are the opposite of triggers. So my
Oh.
feedback on this from the mental health perspective. So whatever we pay attention to wires. So that everyone's like trigger alert and trigger, and that keeps us safe. But there's also glimmers. NSYNC is a glimmer because how do I feel when I think about NSYNC? Ba ba ba, right? So it brings me joy, and it doesn't stay all day, but it's a glimmer. So insert some glimmers.
That's
I'm gonna
good.
steal that.
Yeah, there you go. Glimmers and tremors. All right. So triggers. All right. So Maya, was the process healing at all? This is from the audience. Was the process healing at all, or was finishing it where the most healing occurred?
I think it's a little column A, a little column B. I think that there was definitely some healing in, as difficult as it was, I think there was some healing in being able to give voice, especially to the little girl of the story who wants a seat at the table consistently, daily, still. And I think for that reason, it was healing to say, I'm writing this and I'm sharing things that, yes, are tough, but they are things that we, and I say the adult me and the child version of me, have kept secret. So I think that there was a freedom that came with that and giving voice to that child. There was a tremendous amount of healing once the book was done, once the audiobook was recorded. I do the narration for the audiobook as well. And that is difficult to put voice sometimes to some of these traumatic events, but I think I what I looked at, and actually the copies of the book arrived yesterday, and I had my unboxing yesterday, and to be able to hold the book in my hands and to be able to tell that little girl, this is your story, we did it. We don't have to we don't have to be silent anymore. Your voice is being heard. People are going to hear your story. I think that that brought tremendous healing for me, but also my loved ones, to see their reaction to it. It was a very beautiful thing to see they've been supportive, but to watch my husband get emotional about that process as well when I opened the book and handed it to him, and um, to allow myself to be proud. And I think that's where some healing came from, because I traditionally disassociate, or I don't allow myself to be in the moment. And so it's been healing to be on this panel tonight and have this discussion, and to hold the book, and to now be for it to be going out into to the world. So yes, to answer your question, it's been both.
All right. So I want to ask one more question. This one will probably need a fairly brief response. And Tina, you may want to jump in on this at the tail end of it. But question was, who is your target reader and how will you find them?
That's a very good question. When trying to market this book, we've with working with Rising Action, I think we've tried to reach outlets that historically are for a female audience or female identifying audience. We've tried to work with those who are survivors. My target audience, when I wrote this book, it was with keeping a survivor in mind, keeping someone who has battled addiction in mind, particularly a female reader, but again, also their loved ones. Because with the 1 in 3 Foundation, I get a lot of calls sometimes from spouses or partners or mothers saying, my loved one is spiraling. They're having these behaviors and I don't know how to help them. And if writing this book could shine a light on to why sometimes those behaviors manifest, I think that was important for me. So survivors and then the loved ones of survivors or their colleagues are my target audience. Tina?
Yeah, well, similar. We like I will admit I am not on the marketing side. I'm operations. So this is the stuff that I'm actually not the most. I go to all the marketing meetings, but the details of it, that's Alex, and she's very good at that. But from what I've learned from the meetings that I've participated in, we have profiles that we create for each book of a person that we're like, this person is the target person. And then we work backwards from that. We look at we use Google Analytics, we use social media analytics, and also market research, a whole bunch of different things that Alex does, and she has our marketing assistant help her with. And basically, we look at the person that we think would read the book, like Maya said, other survivors, women, certain age groups, and we then work backwards from that, looking at kind of what social media do they use? Do they use Instagram? Do they use TikTok? What do they look at on Amazon? You can get that from Amazon trends and things like that. So it there's a lot going into it. And as I said, that's not my part of, that's not the part of the business that I do, but I've learned a lot actually of how marketing works. And so I think if everyone knew how to market to the target reader, it would be a lot easier, but we try.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Maya, where do we find your book? And where do we find you?
Here, let me put these up. Share the screen. So this is my social media and my website. If you have any questions that we weren't able to get to tonight and you'd like to reach out to me, I always try to be as responsive as I possibly can. So please don't hesitate to contact me on social media or to send me an email through the website and the contact page that's there. And then also, if you're interested in purchasing the return trip, you can use this QR code here to scan and buy a copy of the book. It releases on Tuesday, the 14th. So we are just a few days away from it entering the publishing world. I will say, and I know we're wrapping up on our time, I want to say to all of you who've joined tonight, first and foremost, thank you for being here and thank you being a part of this book journey. But as far as your own journey, please know that when you're working in publishing or you're working to get your stories published, that historically the publishing industry is designed for rejection. And I don't mean that as a disparaging thing, but there are so many queries that go out. There are so many manuscripts that go out, and memoirs and your story can feel like they get lost in the shuffle, or you're getting rejections upon rejections. And that is hard, especially when we have issues of perfectionism or coping mechanisms that don't handle rejection very well. So my piece of advice to you is, please do not let publishing and the publishing industry be a reflection on your personal story. Your story is important. Telling your story through writing is an outlet, but it might also be someone else's saving grace. So whether it reaches that target audience through an article that's published, a book that's published, a personal essay, if you blog it, please don't feel like whatever is happening as you're trying to get your book out into the world, don't let that stifle you. And I just really hope that you practice self-care throughout this process as well, and that we were able to provide some insight tonight into how you can do so.
That is a great way to wrap it up. Thank you, Maya. So, Tina, thank you very much. Brenda, very insightful as always. To our audience, thank you so much for being a part of this evening. And Blake and Writing Workshop, thank you so much for hosting it. And everybody, get prepared. Hope you really are ready to read this and write your own memoir. So thank you all. Have a great evening. Good night.
Night.